Hello and welcome. Let's talk about episode 5 of The Mandalorian, entitled The Gunslinger. Now remember, the way I do these reviews is I'm going to spoil everything to start off with, and if you don't want that, go ahead and skip to this timestamp right about here. And then we'll talk about the bad things, my nitpicky things, the things that made me go meh, and then all the great things about the episode to finish out this video. So remember, you don't want things spoiled, skip to this timestamp right around here. Okay, so the episode opens with Avery being shot at by another bounty hunter in space. The bounty hunter demands that Avery hands over Theo and manages to take out one of Avery's engines. He tells Avery that he can bring him in warm or bring him in cold, and Avery hits him with the trademark infringement. Avery's ship is badly damaged after the dogfight, but he's able to reverse the polarity of the deflector dish to get the engines back up and running long enough to land at Mos Eisley. Theo decides to sleep this adventure out, and Avery locks him away in a cupboard for safekeeping. Having landed, some of the annoying robots from the Phantom Menace go racing for Avery's ship, but Avery sends a warning shot their way, and they go running off. Some mechanic lady comes running out, screaming at him for shooting at the robots, and going over all the parts he'll need to get the ship repaired. Avery offers her 500 Imperial credits, which she begrudgingly accepts as a docking fee, but insists on better tinder for the cost of repairing the ship. Avery insists that no droids are used in repairing his ship, and the mechanic calls him a womp rat as he walks off. As Avery walks through Mos Eisley, we can see that the residents of Tatooine were especially harsh toward former members of the Empire. The mechanic and her crew are goofing off playing poker when Theo wakes up. The mechanic, who we find out is named Pele, falls victim to Theo's charm, but still plans to charge Avery extra for babysitting. Avery enters the cantina and saddles up to the bar, asking the bartender, who I'll call Isaac, obviously, if there's any work for a bounty hunter. Isaac informs Avery that the Bounty Hunter Guild does not operate on Tatooine anymore, and just because he's not looking for sanctioned Bounty Hunter Guild work does not improve his chances of finding any work at all. A young man fiddling with a coin that has the Rebel insignia on it and sitting in a very familiar booth and a very familiar pose claims to have some work for Avery. The young man identifies himself as Toro, a bounty hunter tracking the assassin Fennec Shand, who is heading out past the Dune Sea. Avery takes a hard pass on helping collect the bounty, exposing Toro for his ignorance at thinking hunting Shand would be easy. Shand is an elite assassin, and going after her would result in Toro being dead before sunrise. Toro confesses that, alright, this is his first job, and he offers all the money to Avery if he just helps him out, as completing this job will get him full membership into the Bounty Hunter Guild. Avery agrees, but when he asks for the tracking fob, Toro breaks it on the wall to ensure Avery has to partner up with him. Avery comes back to the ship and is initially concerned when he can't find Theo, but the mechanic comes running out with Theo in her arms, reprimanding Avery for leaving Theo behind. Avery thanks her for taking care of Theo, before leaving them both again for the job. Toro has brought a couple of beat-up-looking speeder bikes for them to head out to Shand's location out past the Dune Seas. As they leave, we get what sounds like Theo's first words of Mama, but the subtitles insist it's just baby babbles. After driving out in the Dune Sea away, Avery stops Toro because there are some Tusken Raiders up ahead. Toro says he's heard the locals talking about these filth, but Avery corrects him and explains that the Tusken Raiders are the indigenous First People natives, and everyone else is just the trespassers. Avery then proceeds to negotiate with two indigenous First Peoples native Tatooinians for safe passage at the cost of Toro's new Bionox. Avery spots a dewback dragging its rider behind it, and after stopping to investigate, discovers that its rider was shot by the assassin they were looking for. But more importantly, the rider himself was a bounty hunter with a tracking fob. The assassin ambushes Avery, but thankfully the Beskar armor protects him from 2 shots. Avery and Toro wait for nightfall before approaching the ridge where Shand is hiding out. At nightfall, Toro believes Avery is completely asleep and tries to act all cool, pretending he gets the drop on Avery and pointing his blaster toward him. After a couple of takes of this, Avery asks Toro if he's done yet, and an embarrassed Toro puts the blaster away. Avery and Toro rush Shand's position using flash charges to overload the thermal scope feedback and temporarily blind her. Shand still manages to get a shot off that disables Avery's bike, and then hits him in the chest with a second shot. Using the time she's distracted with Avery, Toro sneaks up behind her and gets the drop on her, but she uses a concealed knife to knock the blaster to the side and then puts the beat down on Toro. Avery's armor was able to hold up against the sniper bolt and gets the drop on Shand. Seeing that she's now outnumbered and outgunned and out of weapons, she surrenders. Avery has Shand cuff herself, and she taunts him, asking if she was present at Navarro when things went poorly for the Bounty Hunter Guild. Back by the speed bikes, they realize they have a problem. There are 3 people, but only room for 2 people on one bike. Avery tells Toro to go get the dewback, but Toro doesn't trust Avery enough to leave Avery with the bounty and the bike. Avery spots something far off in the distance through his helmet's viewing system and heads off towards it. The next morning, Shan works on playing mind games on Toro, telling him that the armor alone that Avery has is worth more than her bounty. Toro says he doesn't care about the money though. Shan presses the issue, saying, if not the money, think about your reputation. Think how much reputation you would gain to take down a Mandalorian and have all that armor. And not just a Mandalorian, but maybe the Mandalorian who shut up the bounty hunter guild on Navarro and then ran off with a high-priced bounty. Toro, swayed by her words, has her come closer before pulling out his blaster and shooting her in the gut, telling her that if he took off her cuffs, he'd just be a dead man, but thanks for the advice anyway. Toro then heads off on the speeder to hunt Avery. Meanwhile, Avery returns with the dewback and finds Shan dead and Toro gone. He heads back to Mos Eisley in his ship, where he finds the speeder bike. Heading inside, Avery finds Toro holding the mechanic and Theo captive. Toro sends the mechanic to cuff Avery while he begins monologuing. The mechanic finds Avery holding onto one of the flash devices and tells him that he's smarter than he looks. Avery triggers the flash and gets the drop on Toro, giving him the chance to surrender. But when he spins to take a shot at Avery, Avery shoots him. Avery takes the cash that was on Toro and uses it to pay the mechanic for repairing the ship and watching Theo. We cut back to Shan, still looking quite dead in the desert, where another person is seen approaching her. Okay, so that's the end of the complete spoiler section of the review. Let's talk about the bad things that I saw in this episode. First of all, Avery continues to leave Theo behind, and I know a lot of people are caught unawares by Parenthood, but why on earth does Avery keep leaving Theo behind? Why does he keep abandoning him, knowing that bounty hunters are actively tracking them? He knows that putting Theo in the cupboard will not stop the tracking fobs from working at all. Avery not having Theo with him is the single greatest threat to Avery's safety, as he can never be certain if when he comes back to his safe house where his ship is, that there won't be a bounty hunter waiting for him that tracked Theo. Now maybe this habit of leaving Theo behind will be the trait that gets Theo ultimately kidnapped again. And what they're doing is just showing Avery has this habit the whole time and not making it like this random thing that happens in the last episode or something, which would be good consistency if that's what they do. But the fact that he does it at all really makes no sense to me. The second bad thing I saw in this episode was when we're first introduced to this week's guest star, a man named Toro. He's sitting in the same position, in the same booth, in the same cantina, in the same city, on the same planet as Han Solo. Like they're really leaning into, hey, do you remember the other Star Wars movies you really liked? This is where it took place. And you get to see all these same things. Like, hey, you remember those annoying robots from episode 1? Here they are again. Hey, you remember the robot that had the Johnny Five eyes? Here he is again. Hey, you remember Gonk? Here he is again. Hey, you remember Beggar's Canyon? We're going to talk about that. They really, really lean into the self-references in this episode. And generally, I try to ignore a lot of this, a lot of the more heavy-handed references. But there are so many moments in this one episode. It has the subtlety of a half brick in a sock. If The Mandalorian gets a second season, I hope that they cool their heels a bit on these painful, overt references to the past franchises. It's really breaking the immersion within the episodes to remind you that this is not a standalone universe, that this is taking place inside Star Wars, when I think that this really is working as a good standalone show. And if they just calm down a little bit, just slow them down, didn't make them quite as obvious, I think that they would have a show that you can get more immersed in. As it was, even if I did enjoy the reference, I'd still be pulled out of the moment as I go, oh hey, that's a neat reference to something I like. So that was just one thing that it really continually drew me out of the episode, and it kind of ruined my ability to engage within the episode. Another bad thing was the opening dogfight scene in this episode doesn't make a whole lot of sense. If the bounty hunter blows up the ship, how will he prove that he actually took care of Theo, or the Mandalorian, or Avery? There won't be anything left as proof that he completed the mission. The final bad thing was this episode completely reframes who the Sand People are. No longer are they a group of cutthroat individuals. They're now noble, indigenous, First People, Native Americans. And I'm not even joking about that. They literally have a line where, to their perspective, they're the locals and everyone else is just trespassing on their land. And the idea being that they're such noble individuals who have been forced into this life where they're the bad guys. So yeah, obviously I think there's some very, very small political undertones to who is local and who the invader is, as the show puts it. But the real issue I have with this moment is that it's completely retroconning who the Sand People are. In an episode where they have gone so far out of their way to just inundate us with reference after reference after reference, it makes no sense to go and change such an iconic part of who the people are in Star Wars. Like, it was such a weird transition moment from, oh, hey, remember all this, remember all this, remember all this. Oh, by the way, we're changing this really significant thing. Really weird, out of nowhere. So that's my bad things. Let's talk about nitpicky things. One of the nitpicky things that I'm really tired of is space battles that act as if they're taking place inside an Earth's gravity well, or inside a planet's gravity well, and inside a planet's atmosphere. I try to cut a lot of the space battles in Star Wars especially slack. We're dealing with pretend engines. They could be operating on a completely different method of thrust, but this opening scene was especially bad at it. Not only with just the way Avery's ship's engines look like a jet engine, not only with the way it looks like they have traditional thrust with the ion or the fire coming straight out the back of the engine to propel it forward, but the thing that really got me with this is that there's a moment where he slams on the brake to get behind the pursuer. And the way it does it is it has the engine open up flaps. And that extra air resistance in the middle of space is what he uses to slow down and get behind the ship. That moment, it was such a, are you kidding me kind of moment that I really couldn't look over, this is bad space fighting kind of battles. The best episode, or the best series I ever saw to handle space flight, like this is what a fight in space would actually look like, would be Babylon 5, where they basically had bricks with thrusters pointing off in the different directions. And that was a great example of how a fight in space would work, where just because I apply thrust to the left, if I'm moving forward, it doesn't mean I stop moving forward. Like, I can't bank in space. What's going to happen is when I apply thrust that way, I'm going to be pushed this side. And Babylon 5 really did a good job at that. And I mean, there's been no Star Wars movie that has done a good job of, accurately showing space physics. There have been some that have been especially bad about space physics. I'm looking at you, Last Jedi. But I do try to cut them in slack. It's just this scene, and especially when the flaps opened up to do an air brake where there is no atmosphere in the middle of space. It was a really nitpicky moment for me, and it really brought me out. The other nitpicky thing, and this is a really, really nitpicky thing. I try to be honest about my nitpicks when it's a serious, the space thing, that's a serious nitpick. That is, someone could have done their job and stopped pretending like we're doing aerial dogfights when we're in space. But this one is just me being ridiculous, and I can fully confess to that. But at one point, as they're tracking the bounty hunter through the Dune Sea, we come across a dewback with its rider being dragged behind it. The shot was really poorly done, because what happens is they come up on the speeders, they get off the speeders, they go up a dune, and the camera pans up and looks down over them. And that's when the dewback first becomes visible. This works as a nice shot in a show, but when you think about it, if I'm traveling forward and what I'm seeing is over here behind a giant sand dune, I can't see the thing. There's a giant sand dune in my way. And, you could argue, well, maybe the dune was here, and here's the guy, and he goes behind the dune. And so Avery saw him while he was over here before he went behind the dune. But that's not what happens. The way the entire shot was done was this dune was a huge crest, and there would have been no way to see down over the crest until they got to the top of it. So, super nitpicky thing. I know what they're going for with this shot, but there you are. That was my last nitpick. So, no more nitpicks. Let's talk about the things that I was really neutral about. Things that weren't bad, but things that also weren't good. I don't know if I'm in the minority on this one or not, but I'm all Tatooined out. Like, do people still get excited when a story takes place on Tatooine in the Star Wars universe at this point? Between the original trilogy, the prequels, the way Jakku was a blatant ripoff of Tatooine, and all the video games that feature Tatooine, it doesn't thrill me when the plot comes back to the random planet. The random planet that was exactly supposed to be in the middle of nowhere, where nothing ever happened. So the fact that all this action keeps somehow appearing back on Tatooine, it makes it seem like maybe this is a lot more important planet than we've been led to believe. So I am all Tatooined out. I'm really not excited by seeing the same planets over and over and over and over again, especially in a part of the universe where we're supposed to have such like fringe planets. It makes sense if I was always in the middle of the Star Wars universe, if I was in the core of the galaxy, and okay, well, all the action is going to happen on Coruscant, or all the action is going to happen on these few planets because that's the major population centers. But when I'm trying to avoid everything, how is it that I keep always end up in the exact same part of the galaxy where nothing ever happens? I'm done with Tatooine. I'm wondering if I'm in the minority here or not. But it didn't really impact the story, so it wasn't a bad thing. It's a meh thing to me. There's a choreographed fight between kind of the two guest stars of the week. There's the main guest star, and then there's the bounty they're chasing. And you know what? It's well done. That is a good thing. I know I'm in the neutral category, but that is a good thing. The reason this is neutral, though, is I'm not quite sure how I feel about the fact that the bounty hunter was using martial arts to defend themselves. Like, it makes sense for there to be some sort of martial art form within the galaxy. Like, there's going to be hand-to-hand fights. It's just within the Star Wars universe, you haven't really seen a lot of hand-to-hand fighting, if any hand-to-hand fighting, in the movies at least. And so for it to suddenly be in the show, it kind of threw me for a loop. But the reason it was kind of neutral to me was that the person doing it was Asian. And it felt really stereotypical to have the Asian person know Asian martial arts. And not only that, but between the martial arts, the demographics of the person doing it, and the fact that last week all the villagers were Asian, it makes me feel like what they're doing is pandering to the Asian market. It's something Hollywood's doing a lot in recent years, with everything from The Meg to The Martian, where we have to go and do this one specific scene with one specific geographic demographic of the world. And it's not something that really makes sense within the movies that it occurs in. It's just thrown in there so that they can say, okay, we pandered to this market and hopefully it will do good over there. And on a business level, it makes sense. But if I was a member of this demographic, I'd be pretty offended that I was just being pandered to in the hopes that you would do well in my market. Like that's kind of an offensive thing, or something that at least I think I would find offensive if I was a member of this demographic. I'm not, though, so maybe I'm just being cynical on this one. Maybe I'm looking up too much into it. Maybe I should just be enjoying the scene for the good fight scene it was. But the fact that I do see Hollywood pandering and only including people because they want to get money from those people, it's not something I like. That's kind of soft racism, it seems like. So it kind of, maybe I'm overthinking it. That's the end of my neutral stuff. Let's move on. The things that were really good in this episode. I like how they're continuing to look at the fall of the Empire and how it's affecting the galaxy at large. At one point, Avery's trying to pay for something, and all he has is, 500 Imperial credits. That sounds like a good amount of money, but all it's accepted for is covering a very mundane fee, a landing fee. So a lot of money used for a low price fee, and even then, it's like begrudgingly accepted. So I really like the fact that we're seeing more and more how the fall of the Empire is impacting kind of the universe at large. One of the other things that I like is when Avery walks into the cantina on Tatooine and Mos Eisley, we're given a shot that's very reminiscent of what we see in The New Hope. And while I do find this shot very heavy-handed, what I liked about this, what made the scene so good, was the fact that they're using very practical effects to do everything. I think I saw maybe one CG thing. Everything else looked to be physical, handmade creations. And so that was a really great moment to me. The fact that they're not going down the path that George Lucas took of throwing in CGI everywhere, but they are doing more practical stuff. It made it look better. It made the whole shot just look better. And you know what? The one CGI thing that I think they did put in this scene is fantastic. They did not go cheap on this series. I mean, they are approaching uncanny valley levels of CGI work on this series. And that's kind of across the board praise for them. They are going the extra mile for details in this series. When we're first introduced to the guest star of the week, we get to see him fiddling with some rebel currency, and he claims that he came from the Mid-Rim, which is a region we know to be closer to the galactic core than Tatooine is. So it makes a lot of sense that the closer you get to the galactic core, the more your currency reflects the new Republic currency, unless you get away from the fringe currency, like the blue gel bits that we saw in the first episode, or the Imperial currency. Like more and more, as you head for the core, you get Republic currency. So it was a nice little detail, and I really liked it. And you know, I say subtle. What I mean is, it wasn't beaten over your head. I mean, they did focus on, like, the guy sitting there playing with the currency like this, and the focus is very much so you can see the coin in focus. And then you see the Mandalorian in the background there, and then the camera shifts focus so that the coin becomes out of focus, and the Mandalorian is in focus. So yeah, they do focus on the coin, but still, they don't like beat you over the head with it. And in an episode that was just chock full of beating your head over with references, you know, it was subtle. It was relatively subtle. So I'll take what I can get. Another point in the subtle reference category is the way Avery's bandolier is remaining empty between the episodes. Like, whenever he takes a casing out of the, or a shell out of the bandolier and puts it in his rifle, that spot stays empty. So I am really enjoying the fact that they are tracking the weaponry he's using, which, hey, add that into another good point on this episode. They introduced a new weapon. Each episode so far, I think, they have introduced a new piece of technology, or at least 4 out of the 5 episodes, they've introduced a new piece of technology. They did the vaporizing bullets. They did the whistling birds. I forget, the explosive was last week. They did the little explosive hockey puck. And then this week, we got to see a new flash device where it shoots off a firework and goes, explodes high in the air, and you get a flash. So I do like that they are continuing to track that along, and it really makes me excited. And I really hope we get this payoff, because they are really building it up. So I hope we get this payoff of the last episode, he uses his full arsenal of abilities. That would just be incredible, the way that they're building it up. One of the other great things about this episode was there are several moments in the episode that had me legitimately laughing out loud. One of the moments, Avery gets shot at, but the Beskar steel armor protects him. And when this week's guest star, a man named Toro, comments on it, he says, well, you're okay? He goes, yeah, I have Beskar steel. And Toro looks down at himself and goes, but I don't have Beskar steel. And the Mandalorian kind of like shrugs and goes, nope. And you see like this look of crap come over Toro's face as he realizes that he is a lot more vulnerable. And it was such a great, genuine moment. The timing of the lines was perfect. The delivery of the lines were perfect. It was just golden. It's moments like these that are really making me love the series. And kind of my last good thing to say here is, I did not think that a Disney Star Wars property would have the guts to do what they do to the strong female character in this episode. It was a twist that, while not being completely unpredictable, was at least something that worked based on the character of the characters shown to us in the episode. It was a great writing moment, and I am so glad to see a return to creating a good narrative first, instead of being focused on good social awareness imagery first, and kind of tacking on a narrative to fit the social imagery you want to push forward. I think that what The Mandalorian is doing right now is making it so you could gender swap any character on screen and it wouldn't affect the story one bit. And that is such good story writing. I think that with very few specific exceptions, like where the gender is the primary point of the story, that the ability to just swap the gender and have the exact same story, hit the exact same beats, with the exact same impact is the sign of great story writing. And I think The Mandalorian is just nailing that. So this is turning out to be just a really good series. I know a lot of us were very concerned after the past 4 movies we've gotten out of Disney-owned Star Wars. But it looks like they're doing great in this series. It looks like they are focusing on the narrative. So, you know what? I would give this episode, I'd probably give this episode an 8 out of 10. It had good beats. It had a good narrative as we follow Avery along and see him kind of struggling with the continuing pressure from the bounty hunters and learning with Theo. So all in all, great episode. Probably my second favorite. I think episode 3 is my favorite episode so far, but this episode 5, great episode. So guys, thanks for joining me on this review. And until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord cause his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen.